To many people, this brick street is nothing more than a rough road surface, something to slide around on in the rain, a leftover reminder of a bygone technology. But to many of the citizens of Tyler, this brick street represents a period of growth and prosperity. It is as much a part of our heritage as the oil fields to the east or the rose fields that surround our city. I'm Jerry Simpson. I grew up on this street, and for me, the brick streets are much more than just a paving material. They're part of what gives Tyler its unique character. Recently, the Carnegie History Center asked me to help tell the story of Tyler's brick streets so that we might have a permanent record of what they've meant to Tyler in its past, and also what it means to us today.
Brick streets were an important device that the city used to improve transportation. When you come downtown and you see the brick streets or you drive in the Azalea district, it gives it a different feel than what you would have if it was an asphalt or some other concrete type of street. Really, this came home to me when they had the carriage rides in conjunction with the Heritage on Tour. The sound of horse and carriage on brick is a lot different than on asphalt.
At the turn of the century, Tyler was a bustling community, and the center of activity was the downtown square. It was the center of commerce for the farmers who grew cotton in the area. Like most small towns back then, the streets were muddy and miserable when it rained, and hot and dusty in dry weather. In 1908, Tyler's progressive citizens voted to fund a bond project that would provide the funds necessary to pave the main roads leading into town, encircling the courthouse square.
The city of Tyler first had brick streets around the square and about a block off each direction and down to the depot. That was the main street back in the days when the passenger trains were running. And those were put down about 1908 to 10, and North Broadway was put down about 1912.
I would say 90% of the traffic downtown was horse-drawn. I've driven wagons and parked them around the courthouse square in my days. And I lived out 10 miles north of Tyler when I went to work there, and I rode a horse back and forth to work every day.
After World War I, Texas started developing its public highways. The state would not pave within city limits, though, and it became necessary for cities to improve their streets to unite with the state highway system. Paved streets became a necessity, and their absence could be a public embarrassment. For example, in 1919, a circus had to cancel its Tyler show because Broadway and Front Street were so impassable due to mud that even elephants could not push the circus wagons to the grounds near present-day Bergfield Park. Public pride and improved state highways mandated the extension of Tyler's brick streets from the square outwards.
Well, of course, the automobiles, you had to have a better street, so that forced us into doing more graveling, put automobile gravel, or sand where there was mud or gravel. We had to improve the streets as automobiles come through. Was the big rush, is to improve the streets as the automobile got popular.
In the 1920s, another bond project was voted that allowed for additional paving, extending the street plan into the residential areas, including the area of town now known as the Azalea district.
And we didn't have any more brick paving or paving that was constructed at all until about 2022 or 23. And Tyler voted a big bond issue, and they began using brick paving.
The people voted for a legal assessment type paving where the property owners would be assessed for 9/10 of the pavement and the city 1/10.
As these streets were developed, new areas were developed, new additions, and the streets were very important to the development of the different additions, because as the houses were built, it kept the dust and mud out of the street. And it was very important for the people that lived there to be able to use these streets to go and come to their work, neighborhood, church, park, play, or wherever. But that's one thing that helped make South Tyler what's now known as the Azalea District. Most of the streets in that area were laid during that time, and they were made out of brick.
In the 1930s, oil was discovered in East Texas, and many of the towns in the surrounding area suffered tremendously as heavy equipment was brought in over dirt roads. In bad weather, it would take hours to dig out vehicles that were bogged down in the mud. Tyler was fortunate to have already begun paving earlier, and the street problems of other East Texas towns didn't occur in Tyler.
I remember back before we had any pavement, when I first went to work the city in rainy weather, we had mud streets all over Tyler. Tyler and Longview, Tyler especially, did not suffer in the Depression days, 29, and the oil boom building. We were far enough away, we got the better part of the money. And they come in and built nicer homes and prepared. And usually they build homes in these paved areas and or develop an area of their own and pave it.
I grew up in the 20s and 30s and beyond in the 900 block of South Chilton. At that time, Chilton essentially dead-ended at what is now Lindsay Lane. There was about a 3-block gap before it took up again at Mockingbird. The thing that I remember most about the paving of Lindsay Lane is watching the rhythm with which the bricklayers did it. They would stack bricks all up and down each side of the street. The base was about 4 inches of concrete, then that was covered with sand. Then on either side of the street, there was a little, I guess you'd call it a roller track that was slanted, and men would pick up the bricks at the edge of the street, put them on these rollers, and they would come off of the end of the roller right where a man was laying. And they had 2 men that alternated in laying those bricks, and they could lay them as fast as about 6 or 7 men could run them down this little chute. And it was almost like watching someone perform on a piano. Those hands just went over and over and over like this, and just in a regular rhythm. And they could pave about a 300 or 400 foot block in a day of a standard width street.
When Tyler was a smaller city than it is today, the downtown area was the center of activity. It was where shopping was done. The movie houses were there, as were the banks and most of the major businesses. Saturday afternoons were spent downtown, especially during the war years when soldiers were home on leave. As the town continued to grow and prosper, the bricks continued to be laid. This rare piece of film shows paving work on West Irwin Street during the 1940s.
Most of the brick that were put out in those days were 2.5 inch what we call vertical fiber brick. They were, most of ours were gotten from Mineral Wells Brick Company. And they are very hard and will last almost permanently. They're brought in by rail, and in those days they had to be loaded out of a boxcar into the truck, carried out on the street, and laid along the side of the street, back of the curb and gutter. You first put in the curb and gutter on the street and cut your subgrade to fit the proper crown and compact that. Then most of ours was laid on about a 4 or 5 inch concrete base. And then about 1 inch of sand was put on top of that and smoothed or leveled. And the brick then were laid on top of that. And they were rolled and curled and replaced if any were broken. And then they were covered with hot asphalt, which was heated to about 315 degrees. and that was spread on the top of the brick, which serves no purpose on the top of the brick, but it was spread or squeegeed in order that it might run down between the brick. And that sealed the brick and the sub-base and kept water from going down between the brick. And then sand was put on that while the asphalt was fresh, and the sand would later wear off, and so would the asphalt wear off the top of the brick. And that was a very back-bending job. But we did that then from about 1923 on through to about early 40s. And then they began to use asphalt paving. But the brick will last a long time, and there's very little maintenance to those if they're put in properly and put in on a good base. And Tyler had about 20 3/10 miles of brick streets, and since they were installed then, about 5 miles has been overlaid with asphalt, and they're not visible now.
This is where the old Smith County Courthouse stood. You could stand in the doorway and look right down South Broadway. But in the mid-1950s, the old dome courthouse building was torn down and a new one built. Broadway was opened up through the public square and extended from Gentry Parkway on the north through the downtown and on out South Broadway. It was paved with brick, and Broadway became the eastern boundary of the square. As some of the city streets began to be covered by asphalt, Speedy Thurman, a longtime city inspector with the city engineering department, became concerned about losing the bricks. He convinced the city to utilize some of them in paving the walkway to the Goodman Museum on North Broadway, and also for flooring in the new library on Elm Street. The process of change is natural in all communities. Even here in Tyler, progress has seen changes in the downtown skyline many times during the years since the city was founded in 1849. But in modern times, the brick streets have remained constant. They have been able to withstand the onslaught of progress because they served their purpose well since they were first laid. In 1987, a committee was formed to help determine what the future would be for the brick streets in Tyler.
That committee was formed for certain engineering reasons as well as historical preservation reasons, but there were some technical reasons for forming the committee and doing the discussion we did.
It is a cooperative effort, and I think it was a very good gesture on the part of the city to take this for a Citizens Advisory Board with the city engineering. They did want the input of the citizens and with the historic concerns.
Regardless of what the city council ultimately decides, it is likely that at least some of our brick streets will be preserved. They're part of our continuing heritage, a point of interest to visitors to our city, and a source of pride for our residents. For Carnegie History Center, I'm Jerry Simpson. To many people, this brick street is nothing more than a rough road surface, something to slide around on in the rain, a leftover reminder of a bygone technology. But to many of the citizens of Tyler, this brick street represents a period of growth and prosperity. It is as much a part of our heritage as the oil fields to the east.